Anyways, today we're talking to my good friend David Goel on theology. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm actually, I teach in the history of religions and philosophy, and I'm the director of a center which looks at the issues of religion and public life. And when religion and public life intersect, we usually have an accident, and we get the worst kind of conversations between people. If we look at issues of gay marriage, which have been in the paper recently, if we look at issues of physician-assisted dying, all of these kinds of issues, we often get the worst perspectives from both the secular side and the worst perspectives from the religious side. So what I try to do in my work is pull forward the deeper and more textured thinking from the religious world, as well as from the world of civil ideas. So I've spent my life, I've been very, very fortunate. I've spent my life talking largely with devout people, and that includes devout atheists as well, who are thoughtful, who care about their faith, whose faith is their way of trying to engage the world. Their faith is their way of trying to ask better questions, trying to ask deeper questions. And my sense is that really comes to the very heart of an issue that I know you've been concerned about and you've been talking with your friends about for a long time, which is this huge confusion about what religion really is. And I kind of go back to just look at the word itself. We take the word so often in our day and age to mean some kind of system of belief, some kind of system of behavior.
You're very rigid, this is who I am.
Yeah, often that's the way in which it's understood, but we have to remember that it's understood that way in part because in North America is a little peculiar because the American media is so ubiquitous, so prominent, that the way in which religion plays in America, we tend to think that's the way religion is. But we forget that the particular form of evangelical fundamentalism, it does not include all evangelicals by any means. Evangelicalism is also a rich tradition going back to the 18th century and has given us many, many fine things. But there is a narrow band in the United States and also here in Canada, which is, I would call it a kind of evangelical fundamentalism, which has been preoccupied with behavior, which has in a sense reduced religion to behavior and to a particular kind of moral set of preoccupations. We tend to see religion through that prism so often, but that's really not how religion is for the vast majority of human beings. The word itself, it's always good to remember the word. The root of the word religion, religio. Ligament is the root of it. We have it in our bodies. It holds our bones together. The ligaments that hold our bones together. So to re-ligament, to rebind the bones of our life, the structure of meaning in our life, is really what religion is about. It's that part of human culture through the use of story, idea, image, which endeavors to help people hold their life together and make some sense out of what's happening to them in the world.
In our previous conversations, we have talked about faith and religion individually. There is no such thing as individual religion, but there is simply religion experienced through community and through socialization. There's more to religion or faith than having a concept of a deity or deities, but it's an actual communal concept.
Well, certainly the vast majority of religious perspectives in the world, even ones that I wouldn't be particularly fond of, but I mean, religion Well, let me put it this way to you.
Yep.
Religion, the human part of religion,
Okay, go.
the human part of religion is a kind of community engagement over time, over generations, with a revelation
Mm-hmm.
or with some received wisdom.
Okay.
And it is rethinking that in every time and place. You see, it's not enough just to receive a revelation.
Okay.
You have to, the revelation has to reveal something to you about your understanding of your moment in life, your moment in history. And otherwise, the revelation is a kind of dead letter. The revelation is something that remains sort of in the past or abstract. I like the word revelation, to reveal, to unveil the mystery of things. And so many religions, of course, are religions of revelation.
Yep.
Judaism, Christianity, Islam. I also think that Buddhism, in the life of the Buddha,
Yep.
to some extent is a kind of revelatory religion, although some would distance themselves from that. We have native religious traditions
Yep.
where people go on vision quests and where people receive a song and create a bundle. This is about revelation. This is a coming to recognize, to see, to hear, to feel, to understand a new way of holding the world together. That's what revelation means. We also have religions, I suppose, in a formal sense, which are much more about, simply about a cumulative wisdom. They might reject the notion of revelation, but if you look at them very closely, they have cumulative wisdom. And of course, the revelatory religions have that too. They have an accumulation of wisdom that they pass on to people. So to me, the kind of conversation, you've raised this on many occasions with me, the kind of way so many see religion these days, it doesn't make me angry anymore that religion gets reduced by some people to a kind of moralism or reduced to belief. I got plenty angry when I was younger about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now it just makes me sad. It's
Oh.
tragic.
Okay.
It's tragic because what it does is it deprives people, when people buy into that, it deprives them of the life-giving sources of the religion. Religious revelation, religious narrative, religious image, religious ideas are meant to deepen our capacity to engage the world, to deepen our sense of how complex the world is, to deepen our capacity to respond and be present to the world, and to enrich our life. Jesus Christ said, I came to give you life abundant.
Okay.
The fullness of life. Not some kind of abstract notions of life. Not some kind of abstract pattern of life that if you lived, you would have everything.
Yeah, or the Gnostic concept or Gnostic concept, right thinking, magic words onto the heavenly kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is within you. It's not something external.
Right, the kingdom language is I think it's such a rich language in the Bible.
Right.
What really is that about? Well, it exists in a number of registers. Two great images we have in the Scripture, and certainly within the Orthodox Church makes a great deal of this. When it says that we live in the presence of the kingdom of God. All creation, in fact, the whole of the cosmos, is the presence of the kingdom of God. Now, you've also been very interested in this question of energies and divine energies. And my old friend, Gregory of Nyssa.
Gregory Nyssa and Gregory Palamas, I believe, spoke a bit upon it.
Gregory Palamas spoke a lot about it, as well as others. What were they trying to get at here? what was the real issue? Well, there's a long-standing, I would say it's a kind of natural challenge for the human mind.
Okay.
You know, human beings fantasize God all the time. I mean, the big problem for human beings is not believing in God. The big problem for human beings is believing way too much in a great variety of deities.
Yep.
In imagining God as this, God as that, God as the other thing.
Or the anthropomorphic concept of God.
Yeah,
Yep.
all of that sort of thing. So this seems to be quite central to the way in which the human mind and the human heart tends to work. There are lots of explanations for this, not the least of which is when you're born into the world, your parents care for you, you're very vulnerable, your parents care for you. Some would argue you see your parents as a kind of deity, and the process of growing up is the process of becoming disillusioned with your parents and actually coming to see the world in a more complicated and more textured way. What's so interesting to me about the Bible as a text is there's a sense in which the meta-narrative of the Bible, I mean there's more than one, but the large story in the Bible is really the story about this challenge to the human mind. That is, our appetite to fantasize God.
Well, to recreate how we view the world, and to recreate our concept of God through our own sufferings, or our great passions.
Our own passions. That's certainly many would argue that, and I would, that often our image of God is actually born out of our particular suffering and some attempt to either come to terms with that or to escape that or to elevate it or to make it into something divine. So
Martin Luther, in the Reformed tradition, in the Lutheran tradition, Lutheran Church, I mean, if you ever go through his biography and his history, but what he had to experience through his spiritual journey is quite unique.
Everybody's is. Luther was a great struggler.
Yep.
And had great struggles around this issue of God. Luther certainly saw God growing up in not just in the Catholic world of his day, but in the pagan world of his day. Because we have to remember that even though Christianity had arrived in that part of Europe, there was still an enormous amount of what I would call natural religion that was kicking around in Germany and France and many other places, Scandinavia. And a lot of the old images of the deity, from Old Norse deities and what have you, had become accrued to Luther's understanding. So Luther is a young man, a passionate young man. He was a miner's son, of course.
Yep.
Luther was preoccupied, and he lived at a time when the Black Plague was a huge matter in Europe. So he lived at a time which looked terribly chaotic and out of control. So in times like that, and we see that nowadays in parts of the Muslim world, where things are very much out of control, and people can have so little confidence in anything. So what happens, and certainly for Luther, he had a heightened sense of the demonic. He felt like the demonic was haunting the world, that there were demons behind every door, or in all forms of darkness, or in every shadow.
Yes.
And so Luther had this huge struggle, and I would say, at least my sense is, one of his greatest struggles was to actually come to a place where he no longer saw God and the devil as coterminous. That is, the Lord of darkness and the Lord of light as coterminous. Luther thought he was completely beyond the reach of God's love.
Yes.
He was completely without warrant or value. That he was a worm. That he could never come to the fullness of life and see life as holy. This is a huge religious problem It's a huge psychological problem. It's a
Yes.
huge spiritual problem. There are all kinds of people in the world. You've known some, I've known some. Sometimes we've been in those times ourselves in
Yep.
life,
The
where
dark
we,
night of the soul.
very dark night, where we simply have no sense and no feel for the goodness of life. But what's interesting, Jesus comes along, this rabbi from Nazareth,
Yes.
who certainly there were many of them in his day. It was a very religiously
Yep.
hepped up world, because it was a world where you had the disintegration of local authority and you had the imposition of imperial authority. So it's a time of seething and chaos. So there's a lot of religious geniuses coming along and saying, "I got the antidote. I figured this one out. Here's how we should understand this."
Yeah.
So Jesus is born into that kind of a world, and I often think that Christians have become overly complicated about what they see his good news to be.
Okay.
We say Jesus preached a gospel. That's a beautiful word. It's an Old English word, gospel. The Greek word, of course, if we read the New Testament in the language it was written in, it wouldn't say gospel, it would say evangelium.
Evangelium.
Yeah. The Greek word evangelium is the same as the English word gospel. What is the good news? The evangel gives you the good news. What's the good news? So Jesus preached the good news. And what is the good news? Well, we find it in John 3:16. Jesus says, God is love.
Okay.
And the gospel is that simple. 3 words. God is love. But think of this. Think of this. If you see the world as a battle between good and evil,
Yep.
if you see the world as a battle between light and darkness,
Yep.
if you see the world as an illusion, or if you see the world as a place of trial that you have to get through in order to get to some perfect world somewhere
To
else.
prove you're worthy, or to
Right.
take the Greek philosophy, or the Plato's Republic of Platonic dualism.
If you see the world in a dualistic way, then this is an extraordinary revelation to you, if you get it. God is love. You were meant to exist in the world.
Okay.
There is no one like you, and you are loved by the Creator of all that is. And you are meant to be as you are, not to fulfill some ideal, not to become this, that, or the other thing, but as you are is what God treasures. And the great human problem then is, how do I recognize that, since God recognizes it?
Fascinating.
Are you with me?
Yes, very much so. I mean, it's a very common concept of religion. Like, it's the religion of the deity. It's almost like the ego.
Tell me more.
Like, it's the ego. I must become this. I must do this. I must
It's the
achieve
ego.
this.
I see, yeah. It's to become something else.
Or it's escapism, the rapture theology.
Right.
Or Platonism. I mean, the religion of Plato, it is a religion. To escape physical limitations and to basically be a spirit in the sky. But it's very unusual because, I mean, at the resurrection, Jesus had a body.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned my old friend Plato. I mean, I'm very fond of Plato. I
Same
love
here.
reading Plato, and I mean, he was so great. What's interesting is that the church fathers and spiritual mothers in the Christian East, that is, the ones that read Greek,
Yep.
not the Latin ones, but the ones that read Greek, for whom Greek was their home language. When we look at Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, Nazianzus, and what have you, some of them studied, of course, in Athens as well.
Oh, yes.
And for them, they were accustomed to this Greek world. And so Plato was really the language of the culture that the early church had.
Engaged with it.
Well, not only, I mean, it was their language. It was the language of the culture.
Yep.
And you have to use the language of your culture to make sense. But what was interesting about those early Christian thinkers, they didn't reject Plato. They turned Plato on his head.
Where are you going?
That is, They did something to Plato, which was similar to what Karl Marx did to Hegel. So Plato, you recall his great analogy of the cave.
Yeah, the cave analogy.
Where
cave of arrogance.
He says that human beings and the world we live in, for the vast majority of human beings, it's as if they are staring at if they are at the entrance of a cave, staring at a cave wall, and there's a fire behind them, and somebody is walking between them and the fire, and a shadow is cast on the wall, and they think the shadow is reality.
That's a dog, that's a tree.
That's right. And it's the shadow of a dog and a tree.
Yep.
And Plato was saying, you know, there is something that is real, but we do not apprehend it.
Yep.
So there is the world of the ideal, the world of the good. He talked about it in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But what the church fathers said is, you know, you're absolutely right.
Oh, okay.
You're absolutely right, that's true. But it's not the way you think it is. It's not that there is some other world which is real.
Mm-hmm.
The problems with the human mind,
Human
the problems
vision.
with our seeing, the problem is that what is real is you, is this world. This world is the place of God's delight. This world is the place of reality. But you and I have a struggle to apprehend it because we only see life through the prism of our passions. And that's always casting shadows on the wall. It's our shadows. Our shadows are being cast on the wall.
Our suffering.
And our suffering. So what has to happen, this is why the Orthodox tradition sees the task, the spiritual task, isn't about belief. It's not about behavior. It's about emptying your mind and your heart of those things which make it impossible for you to be open to God's world. And what makes it impossible for us to be open to God's world is precisely as you said, all of the passions that captured our mind and our heart, those sufferings which haven't been healed in us, the wounds we have, the ideals we have, which we turn into gods. And those need to be healed, or I like to put it this way. I like to say that the human mind is so extraordinary. It has a couple dimensions to it which are great human gifts, but also human challenges. One is memory, and the other is imagination. And because we have memory, we can harbor things. We can harbor grievances. Because we have memory, we can be wounded and carry those wounds into the future and see the world through those wounds. Because we have memory, we can be utopian dreamers. And then we have imagination. Because we have imagination, we can have virtues, we can imagine ideals, we can imagine how things ought to be. It's not that that's bad, but when that captures us so completely that we cannot be present to what exists, then of course it is utopian. Then it's something that's abstract and beyond us. So that the spiritual task from an Orthodox perspective, and this isn't peculiar to Orthodoxy. I think there's great teachings within Buddhism about this as well. Mm-hmm. The spiritual task is what we would call self-emptying. It's the task of learning to let go of our suffering so that we can actually be present to what is life.
Okay.
Because what is life is what God loves. And we say that God is the God of life. God is not the God of death. In God there is no darkness, no shadow of turning. God is the God of life. And we are created for life and for life abundant. And the spiritual task is simply this. It's not framed by the question, is there life after death? It's framed by what I would argue is the great revelatory question of this tradition that you and I share, which is, is there life before death?
That I agree with you.
So how do we awaken to and become capable of being present to the life that is given us now? And that is really what I think Gregory of Nyssa means and Palamas means when they're talking about coming into a proper relationship with the energy that holds the world, indeed the cosmos, together. You know, in our tradition we say, because we are also kind of good Jews, we say, you can never know the essence of God. God is the great mystery beyond all. God is ineffable. In our tradition we say, all we really know of God, we know in the simple rabbi from the Nazareth, in Jesus. And that's all we need to know of God. And what we see in him is a person who was never out of step with what was in front of him, who was always present to what was in front of him in a sanguine way, with ease. The woman at the well, Zacchaeus in the tree, the rich young ruler, Longinus, the centurion soldier at the foot of the cross. Jesus was present. He was present. And that's the litmus test for whether you are in harmony with the gift that we've been given, this moment in time, or whether you aren't, whether you're only present to a world of your own imagining. You know, it says in Genesis 3 that God created the world. And my sense is that when what we see in Jesus is somebody who is present to the world that he, as we love to say, that God created. And it says that God created man, male and female, created he them in his image and likeness. And God saw that it was good. When you and I are out of touch with our own being as the image and likeness of God, what happens is we reverse that. We then create the world in our own image. And when we do that, we no longer are alive. We have stepped into the land of shadows, the land of death.
Recreating our existence through our sufferings.
Right.
Fascinating. But the Jews actually have a very unique process. After reading your book, your essay you gave me, the Jews actually also have a very interesting way of combating their own passions. In conservative Judaism, for example, 10 Jews have to be gathered before they read Torah. How do you pronounce that?
That's correct.
Minor?
Minyan.
Minyan.
Yeah, the Jewish spiritual discipline is that when you open the Revelation,
The Torah. Yeah.
the 5 books of Moses, the rest of the Hebrew Bible, that for Jews to, when they gather to pray every day, every morning, there needs to be 10 there before they can actually open the Torah. Otherwise, they just pray. And then if there are 10 people there, they then read the Torah. Now, I see this as a spiritual discipline.
Fascinating.
You see, revelations are hot.
You read?
They're hot. You can read them and think you understand them.
Yeah.
And if you read them and think you understand them, and if you're a believer and you read them and you think you understand them, and you think that it's God speaking to you, you can actually think that your thoughts are God's thoughts.
Okay.
That is a very dangerous thing. In fact, it's the pathway to perdition.
Yeah.
So what the Jewish community has done as a discipline is that it says we need 10 people there for the opening of the Torah to read it. So that, here's my take on it, so that you will hear a variety of people reflect on the meaning of the text. And in hearing a variety of people reflect on the meaning of the text, you will no longer be able to understand your understanding as the divine understanding. In other words, the revelation remains open and life-giving instead of closed and brutal. It can't be a weapon when you hear others speak about what it has meant to them.
I understand the Jews refer to the law as the life.
Law is, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you have various wings of Judaism, but I'm very touched by, in my, not just my reading, but friends I've had who are Jewish colleagues and people I've talked to in the Jewish community over the years, the degree to which so many of them really see the law as a joy.
A joy.
The law gives you a structure, and it gives you a joy and a pathway. There are people, of course, who will take that pathway and take the law and come to understand that the law itself is the end of all. It is what you need to do. But there are far more Jews that understand the law as the pathway that makes it possible for you to have deeper relations. There are lots of marvelous things about Jewish law and about the way that's understood. The word Torah itself is understood to be a pathway. It's one of the translations for it would be pathway or the way. And Judaism has its own complexity, of course. You do have, I'm influenced by Martin Buber, the wonderful Jewish thinker and writer and philosopher of dialogue. And Martin Buber often talked about Judaism as having these two poles. Halakha, law. Agadah, narrative, story. So, in a sense, the law and the story in the Hebrew Bible are always talking to each other.
Okay.
And that's why often you will hear the prophets come along and say, you people, you have sinned against God, you have broken the law again, you're vipers and sinners, and come on like gangbusters. Why aren't you caring for the poor? Why aren't you caring for the widows and orphans?
Isaiah, Jeremiah.
Yeah, all of that.
Really
All of that is there, yeah. And of course, Jesus stands in that tradition as well. So you have narrative and you have law, but of course, law isn't really law if it's just sitting in a book. It has to be embodied and taken on, and the fruit of it has to be lived out. So my own sense is that we have this problem in some of the Christian communities where they want to reduce the Christian faith to moralism.
Yes.
It's not that morals aren't important. Of course they're important. The moral life is terribly important. And one of the great values of it, of course, is that it can protect you when you're young, so that you can actually grow up and come to the place where you can actually exercise appropriate judgment. And also the other benefit of it is that when you do make poor judgment, when you do act in a way that harms others, it can help you become aware of that. But the point of the Christian life isn't perfection. It's not purity. The point of the Christian life is presence.
Presence.
And that's why at the center of Christianity, I often say, you may have heard me say this before, that Christianity is not a moral religion.
Go on.
Because Christianity has at its center not purity. There are religions that have purity at the center, but Christianity isn't one of them. At the center of Christianity is forgiveness.
Okay.
And if forgiveness is at the center, obviously it assumes that there is no purity. And that what needs to happen is you need to lessen the time between your actual missing of the mark, you're
Yep.
doing things that are harmful to yourself, to God, to the world, to others. Lessening the time between doing that and becoming aware of it. And turning around is the word we use in Greek, metanoia, the turning around, so that you
Metanoia.
actually begin to do things differently. Yeah.
I pronounce it metanoia.
Mhm.
Good to miss the mark. But also the word mercy is not to beg for forgiveness, it's to be anointed.
Yes, that's right. I love the word mercy. I mean, in Greek, we always say Kyrie eleison, and even in the translation of the liturgies, which have their origins in the Greek world, that phrase is still held because it's in the Bible. Kyrie eleison. So, Lord have mercy.
Or to anoint.
Eleison, the root word eleison is the olive tree. And in the ancient world, of course, olive oil, you're an old fighter, so you know that.
Yep.
Olive oil was used to anoint the body of the warrior.
Mhm.
Olive oil anointed the head of the king. Olive oil anoints the body of those who've died. And of course, more than all of that put together, times thousands, olive oil in the ancient world still is true, but in the ancient world, olive oil was a primary medicinal agent. It was used to heal wounds. So what does olive oil do on a wound? Well, it doesn't take the wound away. It helps the wound heal, and then it helps, I love this part of the image, it helps the scar from the wound to become supple again. And so when we say, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, what we are saying is, God, please don't stamp on me. That's not what we're saying. That's pagan. That's Zeus.
Mhm.
Or Mars. That's thinking about God that way. Or Moloch. What we are saying as Christians, when we say, Lord have mercy, we are saying, anoint my wounds with oil. Anoint my wounds with oil so that my suffering and my wounds can become supple again. It's an image of the resurrection, Derek. The resurrection, coming forth from death. Because our wounds are a form of death for us.
Mhm.
And so it needs to be suffering again. And that's why we say, and I think it's a wonderful teaching, that sin is not a problem. Unconfessed, it's a disease that becomes horrific. But once confessed, it becomes a form of knowledge. Because it is anointed with the oil of meaning. And now you know something about life that you can share with others in the world. Now you know your own weaknesses, so you can be in solidarity with people who have that weakness as well. Good?
Thank you, here we go.
Good. Nice to see you.